Hello, and welcome to Boundless and Bottomless Seas, a project of Blarn Blog in the regrettable century, and one in which we will be talking about the conservative intellectual tradition, which is something that I think there's like a few other specialists in the left. There's the know your enemy people who I think are very limited. There's Matt McManus, whose knowledge is extensive on the left, and in fact, I mean on the right, from the left. In fact, I tend to trust Matt's opinion on conservatives a little bit more than I trust his opinion on socialism, to be quite frank.
Yeah,
even though I, I like him. I think he's a comrade. Don't people misinterpret me? I don't want to kick him out of the movement or anything.
Yeah, it is possible to slightly disagree with people and also not shove them out the door.
Right. So I have an announcement to make about where we're headed. There was a poll that I put out on my Patreon for the next selection in this series, and I'm going to read them, and then I'm going to tell you the order in which they were voted, and then I'm going to correct that because my audience chose unwisely. So by that I mean I'm going to respect what they voted for, but I'm not going to do it in the order in which it was most popular because I don't think that would actually make sense.
So you're not going to make the economy scream.
No. So here's what they had the choices to pick from. I tried to give them a large selection. Mencius Mollberg / Cordus Yarvin's A Letter to a Young Progressive. Russell Kirk's A Conservative Tradition. John Gray's False Dawn. Roger Scruton, How to Be a Conservative. Arun McIntyre, The Total State, How Liberal Democracies Become Tyrannies. Nick Land, The Dark Enlightenment. Michael Otenschott, Rationalism and Politics and Other Essays. Leo Strauss, Natural Right and History. Norman Porterhurt, Breaking Ranks. Richard Reaver, Ideas of Consequences. And Alain de Benoit, The Problem of Democracy. Now, what I find really fascinating about this is my theory that leftists are attracted to the most obscure fascistic conservatives remains true. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just edgelord meet edgelord action or what's going on there, or maybe it's just like that they appeal to the same type of alienated white boy. I have no idea. But so I am going to tell people what won in the order in which it won, and then I'm going to correct that order. And you will have the next 5 books we're doing once I do that. So the number 1 pick was actually smart. I'm going to give my audience this much. They picked Leo Strauss, Natural Right and History. You can't really talk about either paleo-conservatism or neoconservatism without reading Leo Strauss. It's kind of a requirement, and that's the book to read. The other book to read by Leo Strauss would be his engagements with Kojève. I think it's On Authority and on Tyranny, which are also crypto engagements with Carl Schmitt. But I didn't want to read 3 books for one session. We already took a year and a half to do 1 book. So we're going to speed up, guys. Don't worry. The second most popular one was Alain de Benoit, The Problem of Democracy. So in that sense, we have an American neoconservative / crypto liberal and a post-liberal who predates both the Dark Enlightenment and honestly Fourth Political Theory. Alain de Benoit is sort of the kind of living godfather and probably the smartest member of the French New Right, which is a precursor to all this post-fascist stuff. And it is deliberately post-fascist. I mean, you could pretty much read Evola and almost go this way. Then third place, unfortunately, was Mencius Mollberg, A Letter to a Young Progressive.
Unfortunately, that's right.
Unfortunately. And then fourth, fifth, and sixth place are pretty much tied with Nick Land's Dark Enlightenment, Arun McIntyre's The Total State, and Russell Kirk's A Conservative Tradition.
I kind of feel like that's unfortunate that Nick Land lost out to Curtis Yarvin.
To Curtis Yarvin? Well, yeah. Also, the only two normie conservatives that people want to hear anything about, even though they're way more historically influential and still influential on the movement, are Russell Kirk and Leo Strauss. No one wants to hear about the old neoconservatives. No one wants to hear about Roger Scruton and the British conservative tradition. Everyone just, I didn't even mention it. They just skipped Michael Oakenshoot as if he didn't exist, as they did Richard Reaver and then in the neo-agrarians.
I mean, that might be because in a lot of people's minds, it kind of doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, people need to understand their history more than they do.
Yeah, people should be Googling the words they don't know. Like, oh, I don't know this person, so they look them up.
No, so I'm just into the hot new stuff on Twitter, and I could tell this is Twitter results. If I had added Professor Zhang to this, that's what we got.
Oh yeah, he'd be number one.
Yeah, and I'd be like, y'all like Clio Dynamics, a normal immigrant liberal who became a weird conservative overnight, who's now doing shows on Sneeko with Aleksandr Dugin. Connection, who's talking about Frankist, that conspiracy theory that I think he clipped from Candace Owens, because I do not know where that conspiracy theory comes from. Before her, misunderstands basic biology, misunderstands basic distinctions in Islam and the different Hadith rules and all that, and what the Ummah is. Misunderstands the Illuminati, and I am always surprised how many leftists get suckered by warmed over kind of pathetic conspiracism, but I shouldn't be surprised given where a lot of this whole Western Marxist conspiracy mongering has gone. I'm not even saying Gabriel Rockhill's wrong about some of the stuff in that book, but it encourages a view that, like, oh, if it wasn't for the CIA, nothing would have ever happened bad in communism, which is copium.
Yeah, it's also just unsupportable. It's just like that's a claim that doesn't hold up to any scrutiny.
Well, I mean, if you were just looking at the CIA's influence on intellectuals in the Western Marxist tradition, you might have a point. But claiming that it was the fundamental foundation of Western Marxism and not dealing with like any of the historical membership groups, the influence of the Sino-Soviet split on those groups, the way this played out in various sources, the division over what happened in China in 1982, the division over what happened in Cambodia and Vietnam in the 70s and early 80s. You cannot talk about this stuff and bracket all that out, and that's what this stuff seems to do. It's very flattering to a bunch of know-nothings, and I have no problem fucking saying that. And so, anyway, how I'm going to fix this, guys? The top 6 books you chose will be the books we read next. It'll be a while before we do another vote. But we're going to do it in order that I think will actually help you understand things. I'm sorry. 1, we're going to cover Russell Kirk's conservative tradition because, believe it or not, I still think it's relevant. It is the basis of Reagan fusionism. It is becoming, weirdly, the basis of Trump fusionism, as all the other weird shit gets pushed away by the fact Trump is acting just like a standard, but more irrational and less strategically deaf neocon. The stuff that you and I used to say about him is he's never done anything as Bush has done for geopolitics is no longer true.
Yeah, it's not true at all anymore.
So, I know there's some people who would disagree with me, but those people are wrong. Then we will read Leo Strauss, Natural Right and History. Then we will read Alain de Benoit, The Problem of Democracy. Then we will read Mencius Moldbug as much as I don't want to do it. Then we will read Nick Land's Dark Enlightenment. And I'm going to add something to this that I haven't decided yet, but I'm going to add a more normie conservative book somewhere in here because we need to talk about one, but maybe one that's more relevant today, like Patrick Deneen or something. I didn't put the post-liberals on here, and I probably should have.
I mean, there's still time.
And Ross Dunhat, maybe one of those guys. Although we're covering his Decadence book in our Decadence series, so
yeah.
I
feel like I need to say this, but I feel like I say this all the time, but it's like it just has to be said. If you think that this system of thought is pretty good, it's perfect, then it's ruined from the outside. And if not for the outside influence, there would be no contradictory developments. It would be splitting, whatever. I would say that your reasoning is undialectical.
Yeah. I think that one thing we have to look at if we are good dialecticians is realize that the right mirrors the left for a variety of reasons, because we live in the same sociological and economic conditions.
Yes, exactly. We are contending with the same world. We are processing the same ideas, experiencing the same things, drawing different conclusions to reach, at least purportedly, the same ends.
So, I mean, one, liberals have convinced a bunch of people, including some leftists, that the right was unified when it never, ever has been at all. It's less unified than the left, actually, because the status quo it wants to preserve as its modus operandi very dramatically, and sometimes are completely imagined.
Yeah.
So there's that. Also, there is a lot of the right stealing the less valor, but then again, so we steal their valor too. We're again same society, dialectical. And the one thing I will say though is one of the deceptive things about talking about the conservative intellectual tradition. It's a conservative intellectual tradition plays a different role in conservative politics than the left intellectual tradition plays in left-wing politics. And whether we like it or not, the intellectual tradition in the left is actually more important because it drives our policy and function.
Yeah.
Whereas on the right, it is often what drives not so much policy and function, but justification and goals in the long run, which is also true for us, but it is a little different. And since its end goals and mission are completely different. And that's something we're a lot like the right. We come from the same society. As much as we don't want to believe it, we even overlap in class background when it comes to who's writing and this, that, and the other. But when you look at the goals of our politics, they are fundamentally different in a way that means that we can't mirror the right.
Yeah, we just can't. It's also the case that we can't develop thought as an explanation for and or justification for the outcomes or the processes of political power because we don't have it.
Right. Well, except when we try to argue about prior political power,
well, I guess
the Soviet Union and people one of the things I'm getting very frustrated with is there's this crisis right now on the left, and the response has been to relitigate the stupidest parts of the 20th century as a conspiracy theory. And that's even though I'm going to say some of the conspiracies are true, all right? It's not completely made up. There was CIA influence on left-wing intellectuals. There was CIA influence on all intellectuals. CIA was all over the universities.
Absolutely.
And actually, we should expect that. I've actually found interesting that no one's talking about CIA influence within the movements. They're just talking about the intellectuals, partly because it's harder to know unless you're just willing to dig into COINTEL profiles.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting about this whole period is while it seems to be critical of intellectuals, it makes intellectuals the driving force of history. And this is true for a lot of tendencies.
That would be formally anathema in terms of what people how we conceive of things, but it would
Right. Well,
actually be quite in line with the realities of how we conduct ourselves and how we perceive of things.
right. I mean, any sense, and I know this word is abused, both on left and right, we tend to have idealist tendencies, thinking the ideas come first and they're not in feedback with a complicated set of relations.
Yeah.
That show up in both the base and the superstructure, to use a metaphor I don't even like because people misunderstand it.
Yeah, I mean, but that's just true of everything.
Yeah. So to get to the book, since no, I'm chastising myself, not you, Jason. To get to the book, I want to talk about a few things with Dugin as we wrap this up. This is our penultimate episode on Dugin. The next episode will be probably the Appendices and our overall reflections of the experience of going through this book, and some chapters almost line by line.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting about this is the only thing I do that gets a lot of like weird right wingers like to watch the channel. It's actually kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people really want to understand and grapple with Dugin, and I think that very few people actually want to do the work to do this, or maybe they're doing it and they need help, or they want to check their ideas against other people's, because, to be frank, sometimes it's not entirely clear.
Oh well, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
And to be completely on, although I love when Dugin called Lukács a neo-Marxist, as if Lukács wasn't like around, simultaneously to the early Soviet Union.
As if Lukács wasn't a member of the Communist Party in Hungary, wasn't a part of the Hungarian
government.
Soviet Republic. Yeah, it's like the dude was he was a communist, and thus he was a Marxist.
Right.
If those words are used consistently.
Right. I only refer to neo-Marxists to people, and I don't really refer to them that way, but the people who are solely academic in their Marxism.
Like,
and even then, I think it's because it's neo-Marxist, post-Marxist, or sectarian Marxist, right? But because we all live in the advent of the collapse of traditional Marxism, which really happened in the 1970s. Which I know that's going to piss a bunch of people off, but it's just kind of fundamentally true.
I mean, I would even just say, if you want to pick some really easy dates, you could just say end of the Cold War, which is really, really generous. Let's say the end of the Cold War also means the end of, I mean, that's when you start to be neo-Marxism, whatever.
Right.
When you start writing books like Heideggerian's books, or
I consider that just straight up post-Marxist, to be completely honest. Laclau for post-Marxist. And
I guess that's right.
Whereas I consider I would even say David Harvey is a neo-Marxist, because a lot of these people don't believe in any of the versions of labor theory of value. They're marginalists.
Okay, that's fair.
Or and I would even call the analytical Marxist, and maybe even the political Marxist, neo-Marxist, but I wouldn't call Lukács a neo-Marxist. In fact, he's kind of the inventor of philosophical Marxism.
Yeah, he is.
It's him and Porsche.
And Lukács is the big name. If you are like a casual student of Marxism, and you're like, oh, the Hegelian Marxists, what are those? What's that all about? It's like, well, the very first name you're going to come across is Lukács.
Yeah, and good luck saying that Lukács was created by the CIA. Anyway, unless they're time traveling weirdos.
And on that note,
let's talk about the gender and the fourth political theory, because it makes about as much sense as time traveling weirdos.
This is actually the most This is the weirdest
That shit.
of the section. Yes, that's right.
Like,
It's like if we started off this book with me saying like, "Oh, I'm sympathetic a little bit, and I can see here and there, and like, I'll be very generous and benefit of the doubt and so on." By this chapter, I don't think I'm going to say that very much.
yeah. I'm just going to read two full paragraphs and I'll start summarizing. So you guys don't worry. We're not doing line by line anymore because we want to finish this eventually. We have lots of digressions that we do. Jason, people were complaining about our digressions on the Decadence podcast. And you know what I say to that? Find a different podcast.
The digressions on those are my favorite. That's the best time.
They're like, oh, you didn't talk about anything for the first 20 minutes. I'm like, no, we talked about everything else. I don't know what your problem is. Sure, it's self-indulgent, but I actually, funnily enough, I found that on that episode we stayed on topic more than whatever because I took outline notes for the entire series of the Aufhebung section. But anyway, enough meta commentary on my audience.
Not just your audience, we get some of that too, but
yeah,
we usually don't say much about it. Part of that's because whatever.
You're not as willing to be antagonistic to your patrons as me. Actually, it is interesting. The commentary and complaints change dramatically depending on the format at which people are engaging. But anyway, so I get complaints in all formats, but they're different. But back to this gender. I'll read 3 whole paragraphs, which unfortunately is most of the chapter because also these chapters are like fugues. I feel like I'm reading a Bung Chul Han book all of a sudden. The 3 political theories of modernity all ask the same question: who is a political person and what is the political gender? At first, the person is man. From the sociological point of view, women becomes persons only recently, and this raises a question of women's political rights. From the viewpoint of modernity, woman is not a person. A person can only be a man. However, not every man, only a special type of man. The characteristics of the real man includes wealth. Until the end of the 19th century in Europe, property was a necessary attribute of citizenship, i.e. political gender. Rationality, thrift, living in a city. The peasant was not considered an equal in social political significance. Thus, in the elections to the first Duma in Russia in 1905, the voice of one townsperson was equal to 100 peasant voices. I find it interesting how much he assumes about modernity from Western media predictions of Western history and Russia.
Yeah, like from the not modern or the semi-modern state of Russia at the time. Yeah, and
then from like what CNN was saying in 2005. So like, it's kind of weird. The voice of one's townsperson was equal to 100 peasant voices. In modernity, a peasant is not quite a person. I mean, it is true also in modernity, a peasant is not quite a person, except the peasant has also been, frankly, the main political actor of revolutionary modernity, particularly after the 1930s. And what did the peasant do? Abolish themselves.
Yeah.
I'm just, like,
I think like one thing here is that when we say here, if we say in modernity, then I would say there's lots to quibble with. If we wanted to say in bourgeois terms, in modernity, then maybe there's a little bit more. It could be
post-capitalist society from the 16th century forward. I mean, there is some things in which classical conceptions of a person do matter here because that actually is like notions of citizenship come from that.
Yeah.
Hence property, hence weighting of voices. Like that's all. Like if you go into like ancient Roman class structures, like where the proletariat comes from. A proletariat is a person who can only give to the state their children to fight for the army. That's the like Roman definition.
Yeah.
Because they have no property or wealth. Anyway, but they're not slaves. The voice of one other characteristics of being a man include maturity and age. Those socio-professional and age categories indeed included the concept of gender and gender functions. The last characteristic of a man is that it must belong to a European civilization and have white skin. I love how selectively and evilly woke Dugin can be 1 minute to make completely anti-woke points. It's actually kind of like a brilliant inversion of the problems of some of these identity political categories. When considerations of a cultural superiority and racism are taken together, this political man, or l'homme politique, from the anthropological point of view, such gender tenets are an axis for all three major ideologies of modernity and their derivations. However, within these ideologies are the differences in relation to this figure of man. The most male-forming theory is liberalism, as it considers the figure of the rational, rich, adult, white male as a norm and natural phenomenon. Now, I find this interesting because it seems to me like modern liberalism completely inverts this, but it's like a shadow inversion of the original thing. And I would say like one of the interesting functions of like radical liberalism is that it agrees with this figure that the main actor of modernity is male, but it's because of marginalization and oppression.
Right. Like that this is true, but we don't like it.
Right. Yeah. Not that this isn't true.
Right.
I mean, there are some people who come out of that.
Never been true.
Right. There are some people who come out of this radical liberal tradition who do get to that point. I don't want to disparage the whole thing. I don't want to be like dishonest in my criticisms here. But it is just interesting to me because it is also true that in early liberalism, the worldview is particularly male because factory work is separate from domestic work and social reproduction is separate from the reproduction of economic means in a way that it is not in a peasant village or a farmstead or whatever.
Right. The thing is, I think if you were to just take these categories at their face value and you were to look and to really examine the condition of women during the Jacobin years at the kind of the dawn of liberal modernity, it's pretty clear actually that citizens and that is to say men are the ones who matter. They're the ones who factor in various ways. Like it is true, but also it's actually not true at all.
Right. Liberalism canonizes this conception of gender and standardizes it, trying to eternalize bourgeois social systems typical of the 18th and 19th century Europe. Liberalism asserts the factuality of this gender and projects it onto the future. The modern world is constructed by man, conceived and anticipated by men, and will belong to men. Homo economicus and homo faber, which would be the economic man and faber.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
Man, my Latin is fading.
I'm gonna look it up.
It means man the maker or man the constructor. Okay. Such understanding of gender, such understanding of gender is an undergoing changes with time, although homo economicus would also mean something different in the ancient world because the oikos was the household.
Yeah.
Although the household was full of slaves. So I don't know, make of that what you will. The area of gender that is men increases, the standard archetype begins to include peasants, the poor, women, and then non-white races. How does this mechanism apply to the case of women? For women, manly characteristics start to be attributed to them. A businesswoman is one who manifests male qualities. White females become citizens. Thus, the woman starts to be the thought of the man. So liberal feminism, or the aspiration to give women freedom, means to identify a woman as a man and thus to equalize them socio-politically. That is, to represent a woman as a man socially. The same procedure is applied to the rural peasant as to the urban city dweller. Bullshit. The rural peasant stops having an economic function. It's not a social function. goes away, you only need 2% of the population engaged in agricultural labor in modern industrial societies.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna say bullshit outright on that one. Also, I like there's not a willingness to look at how historically constructed specific pre-bourgeois notions of feminism are, our female virtues or values are, and how variant they are, even in early modernity.
Right. This does take bourgeois conceptions and then trans-historicizes them.
Right, while also historicizing them, but like selectively.
Yeah.
The same procedure is applied to the rich peasant as the urban city dweller, and non-white races as right, as poor as rich, the stupid as reasoning. So what Dugin's trying to do is almost the medieval thing of like, these categories are eternal. They're each valuable. We shouldn't hierarchize them in worth. But they are our problems are just because we conceive them as unvaluable in liberalism, but they are essentially different and they can't do these other things. So a woman who sits behind the wheel of a car is a man or a character of a man. However, under liberalism, the divisions of social conceptions of gender remain. I was about to make a really mean joke about women sitting behind the wheel of a car, but I'm gonna shut up. And if people who don't get my joke, you can figure it out. It's mean-spirited, and it's even mean-spirited for me, so I'm not going to do that. However,
that's a special tier in the Patreon.
Yeah. However, under liberalism, the divisions of social conceptions of gender remain. Women may acquire the same technical rights as men, and thus in performing functions of a man may be considered equal to a man, but the social construction of men and the man and the woman is unchanged. It's changed, although I do think, I would, if I was going to do the rational kernel of what Dugin is saying here, women are often recognized in positions traditionally associated with men in bourgeois societies by manifesting traditionally male traits. So in most states, not all, Scheinbaum is an example in Mexico, but in most states, the first female leader will be a reactionary. Margaret Thatcher is more common than Scheinbaum.
Yeah,
I think as a historical phenomenon.
And that's regardless of the formal nature of the state itself.
Yeah. It is also true that it also tends to run true for people of color, although they tend to be more centrist in orientation when they actually become leaders in. And I'm not just thinking about Obama. There's many. I'm thinking about Benito Juarez in Mexico. I'm thinking about, the indigenous person who also like basically did more to end indigenous autonomy in Mexico than anybody else. I'm thinking about, in some ways, I'm thinking about Stalin because he was a minority in the Russian Empire.
I guess he was.
Yeah, I mean, like people always think about
Evo Morales seems to be the outlier there.
Yeah. And Stalin's debatable, but Stalin was the center of Bolshevik tendencies, no matter how you toy it.
Adjusted to his scale, then yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which that's also going to probably make a bunch of people mad at me, as I said Stalin was a Marxist centrist.
I mean,
but anyway,
he was known as the outstanding mediocrity in the party. Like, not mediocrity as an insult, but like
he was the mediating factor. He split the middle. Like,
exactly. That's not my term. That's just historical.
So I think that's interesting to think about. So in that sense, Dugin isn't entirely wrong. Also in the sense that like having women implicated in the workforce has not led to women's social reproductive work like going down very much. It's just led to it not being done. and becomes more and more a function of the state. Okay, fine. The second political theory, Marxism, starts from the same position. Gender is a bourgeois political construction, but this situation is criticized and need to change the situation as expressed. From here develops an idea of total equity, including the terms of gender. The concept of gender equality in the second political theory is quantitatively differs from the understanding of equality in the first political theory. Feminism or gender egalitarianism of Marxism contends that both men and women exist in the context of Marxist ideology, cease to be men and women who constitute the standard and imperative gender divisions of liberalism. That is, we see the desire to move beyond gender in the bourgeois interpretation. In fact, the man loses the sole possession of rationality. The Hungarian nope. Just call him a Hegelian Marxist if you want to make a distinction, but he's not a neo-Marxist in any fucking sense. Philosopher. Unless you think all the Bolsheviks were.
I mean, that is the position of some people, but
yeah,
I don't think that's actually his position.
George Lukács, or Georgi Lukács, depending on how you want to put it, said the dialectical method, as true to the historical method, was reserved for the class and was able to discover within itself the basis of its life experience in the identical subject-object, the subject of action, the we of Genesis, namely the proletariat. Proceeding from such a formulation, classical Marxism. Okay, so why call him a neo-Marxist and talk about classical Marxism? Anyway, Dugin, you can't even get your fucking category straight in this chapter. Classical Marxists consistently call for insanity to schizophrenia to schizo-revolutionary. Deleuze? You're saying Deleuze is a traditional Marxist? Also, that's more guitar-y, fucker. But you're calling Deleuze a traditional Marxist.
I could see calling him schizo-revolutionary. Although I otherwise, I've never heard that. I don't know. I've never.
Classical Marxists consistently call for insanity to schizophrenia to schizo-revolutionary. Deleuze.
Yeah.
Not where he says this either. It's just like cited like it's obvious. They rely on the urban poor and the proletarians who could never become fully French bourgeois. They turn to the non-white urban populations, however, they ignore those who live in rural areas and peasants. No, we fucking don't.
No,
the greatest debates of Marxism are about how we feel about the peasants.
Yeah, and that's going all the way back to like the 1890s.
Jesus Christ. But on the whole, the gender of the policy of the communists, we see a new tendency. They recognize it. Mm-hmm.
He's not entirely wrong. If you only looked at like the American socialist history and you looked at people like Daniel De Leon, you would say, yeah, the Marxists ignore the agrarian side of life, whatever. But that's not what he's doing.
No. And also, when you could say that we favored the proletariat because we don't think the peasant can reproduce society. The peasant can reproduce their own subsistence. Like, that's why. It's not like some secret organism of the male inverted into something else, but we ignore the peasant. Like, I hate to tell you, but the peasantry was the primary fighting force in China. So, they are whether or not you agree with Maoists. Yeah, honestly, they were. And they were the basis of the SRs and a lot of the allies of the Bolsheviks. And there's a whole lot to be said about how the Bolsheviks tried to contain them and how that did not go well. From the Red Terror to the Kulak War, which we should call a war, to finishing off the peasants in the Yizovchina or the purges. So,
the truth is, like, this has never been a minor question.
No, and this is like assertion as history in like the worst way. Like, it's almost just making shit up and attaching a few names to it. Classical Marxists turn to sound like Deleuze. What the fuck are you talking about?
That has to be one of the least explicable, really honestly laziest formulations in this entire work. So
this is an Alex Jones level dumb formulation.
Yeah.
Actually, I might even give Alex Jones more credit than that. He kind of knows what Hegelian dialectics is, sort of.
I mean, kind of, but yeah, it's more
in
like
the
text
same way that
mark.
like the undergrads know what they are.
Yeah.
But anyway, but on the whole, the gender policies of the communists, we see a new tendency. They recognize the status quo of gender and offer to change it under the banner of historical materialism. This means the transgression of bourgeois man in the downward direction and the appeal to the material substance, literally what stands below the substate, to undifferentiated realm of work where there's no qualitative difference between the good cooking woman, the sailor, and the masculine hero. Marxists venture even lower down where there is nothing left of gender hierarchies and strategies. Thus, the most extreme Marxists have the ideas, a desire to destroy the bourgeois archetype. The reality of practice, however, was different from the theory. In Stalin's Russia, the male archetype, the rational dominating man, prevailed, despite attempts to recreate Marxist gender equality immediately consummate with the revolution of 1917. But the idea of overcoming social construction of the man through the reference to anatomy through the desiring machine is a characteristic of Marxism. And again, he makes another goddamn Deleuze reference as if it is a normal Marxist position.
Yeah, and I gotta say, like,
this is outright dishonest.
Yeah,
like,
and I have been whatever, Marxist for all of my life and pretty disciplined intellectually, and I have barely even encountered Deleuze until much more recently.
I'd encountered Deleuze in college as an anti-Marxist postmodernist.
Yeah.
And
now that being said, there is some.
I think the part about Stalin's Russia is actually fair. I mean, the other thing that you'll notice, he's not talking a goddamn thing about China. He won't touch Chinese gender relation stuff because the Chinese actually did try to do for a long time what the Soviets couldn't do, even if they were more conservative on sexuality. So they were much more punitive on homosexuality. And that has slowed down in the past 30 years. And they've never been like exterminationist about it, but it is dishonest to claim that they were not fairly punitive on homosexuality. As was Cuba at one point too.
Yeah.
Although I will also point out that we were worse and for longer.
Well, and also Cuba has like
formally apologized.
I was gonna say not just formally changed their position, but also has tried to
acknowledge and correct it. Whereas like I don't see us doing reparations for putting gay people in jail until 2001 in your home state,
or reparations for anything else.
Yeah. Not that I think that reparations are the answer for most social problems, but that at least shows an attempt. But anyway, fascism, the third political theory, accepts the model of the urban white European rational wealthy man and exalts it. If liberalism accepts the model as a norm, then fascism begins to gift the man with additional properties. In National Socialism, he should not be simply white, but Nordic white. That's also like this whole whiteness shit. As a European, Dugin knows that is more of an American settler colonial thing in the Americas than it is in Europe. The specific like whiteness is associated with the Nordic white. That was not just fascism. It was also British liberalism.
And it's also the case that German National Socialism and Italian fascism have almost incompatible
completely
race.
Yeah, even though they squared that circle, yes, they did. And separate from them both was the Spanish Phalange.
Yep.
Which is why someone like J.R.R. Tolkien, who had good positions against the Nazis and the Italians, had weird positions on Franco.
Yeah.
By weird, I mean supportive. All right. And not just rational, but possession of the unique form of reason only the Germanic Aryan race possesses. This is similar to the position of Levi-Bruno, who postulated that only Europeans have logos and that other peoples are guided by a pre-logical, non-civilized social structures. Well, this is like early pre-liberal thought, Broham.
Yeah.
This is like, particularly as soon as I mean, it did not used to be formulated as race. It was only Abrahamics had the logos, or only Christians had the logos. It was not only white people or only Europeans, but still. Masculinity was further exalted, and women were urged to engage only in Kinder, Kirche, and Kuchen, children, church, and kitchen. And the tenets of gender were often peripherally. For example, Julius Evola in his Metaphysics of Sex, in which the superiority of the masculine over the feminine is asserted, it is argued that men are dormant potential gods and women are dormant potential goddesses, but standing a little lower in the hierarchy of the sexes. While considering the third political theory, the French conception of Nordic matriarchy should also be mentioned. It was an ontology of the feminine. Hermann Wurf, a disciple of Bachofen, argued that the supreme being is a woman, but that the woman is completely different from the man, and a woman in her ontology, Weises Frau, the wise woman. However, I translated, it's not translated in text. In the third political theory, the image created by liberalism and then exaggerated remained the norm. So he likes the weird dissident fascist as normal, but doesn't admit that they're fascist. All right. And the fourth political theory represents an aspiration to overcome the gender construction of the political theories of modernity. In this case, what is its gender strategy? It's imperative. First of all, the fourth political theory puts outside the brackets the man, in other words, the man as a gender with social constructions that are characteristic of modernity. The fourth political theory does not address the last man as he represents a closed archetype of modernity. Outside the sphere of gender, the fourth political theory gropes towards the contours of its man in face of this construction of man as he who possesses reason, wealth, and responsibility, city, white skin color, and so on. We revolt. This image of man must die. He does not have a chance. I mean, in this, he sounds like fucking like Solanus almost. That's funny. Yeah. But he's doing it for the opposite purposes, and we'll get to that. He does not have a chance to survive as he is closed inside modernity's historical deadlock. He reproduces the small hierarchies and cannot go beyond its borders. Such a man believes himself to be immortal. In self-reflection, he creates permanent realities. Mirrors look into mirrors. The same goes for all the images of the man which modernity extended, the businesswoman, the non-rights written respectable roles, and so on. Notice here that he's basically arguing, like Solzhenitsyn did, that everyone needs to stay in their fucking place. Like, this is what this is. But it's done in almost like we're a gender abolitionist before that became an anti-trans word. The positive attributes to man beyond the paradigm of modernity is the non-adult. The subject of the fourth political theory is the non-adult male. For example, La Grande Jeu of Gilbert Lacombe and René Dumas, both reactionaries, who offered to live their lives without maturing to remain physically at being children. This can be considered an invitation to develop the gender tenets of the fourth political theory, a system of aesthetic and political philosophy. Under conception of the non-white man lies the pre-logical world systems of Louis Bruno, where the logos is not only the means of social organizations. We draw from Levi-Strauss's theory of social anthropology and ethnosociology that draws from the analysis of the experience of many non-white societies. Further, from the madness, all forms of intellectual transgression and the practices of voluntary insanity from Friedrich Hölderlin and Nietzsche to Bataille and Arnauld. Madness is part of the gender arsenal of the fourth political theory. In general, the non-white European, insane, non-urban, defined by a constructed landscape. For example, an ecologist or an aboriginal. This person who does not break with nature as discussed in Refold in its default society. Thus, we create a search algorithm woven of the elements that have ignored or rejected by modernity. This is made up a huge experience of existence and metaphysics, a field of extensive being of the fourth political theory, supplementing the fourth political theory, which refuse all those tenets about the gender which liberalism carries within itself. The second political theory's gender conception, it would be permissible to borrow an idea of the desiring machine, which is not from Marxism. The idea of overcoming the man through global egalitarianism and the limits of... He's literally taking the Nietzschean parts of post-Marxism and giving it to Marxists so he can claim it as Marxist.
Yeah, he does just too many mental gymnastics in this entire chapter.
I mean, he does it in the book too, but this is where we really get off the... I mean, it's not the only place we get off the rails. Like, we were basically talking about egregores and like ideas having human rights. But this is also off the rails. It would be permissible To borrow the idea of the design machine, the self undercoming to the man through global egalitarianism within the limits of the material. From the classical fascist gender model of the third political theory, as well as liberalism, there is nothing to learn. While the conceptions have developed, their fringes may be of great interest, namely sex ontologicalism from Evola and the idea of Nortric matriarchy. So he likes the cool esoteric shit from fascism as per normal, but he doesn't like saying it's fascist. Then we get to the Dasein, and I'm not gonna read all that, but I'm gonna subject. The subject is not Hegelian for our friend here, Dugin. It is human existence in the most fundamental state of becoming, our being. Thus, Dasein has to be pre-sexual or neuter, but does not negate the fundamental differences of the sexes.
Yeah, Dasein can somehow be sexualized, but that sex which it has can be neither man nor female in a gendered sense.
But it also can't be. It also cannot be, God forbid, transgender either. Don't you dare. That's more clear from Dugin's later thought. So
perhaps it makes sense to speak of androgyny, maybe, but only if not. Yeah, just.
Yeah, well, I'll actually get to that. Dugin calls it referring to the metaphysical understanding of sex that see masculine and feminine as cosmic principles rather than just biological functions or roles. So he's saying we should get beyond the essentialism of sex by becoming more essentialist about sex. So we move from biological essentialism to metaphysical essentialism. It's the move in Evola from biological racism to metaphysical racism.
Yeah.
Like, the Jew can be a good Italian because he's no longer a Jew by embracing the metaphysical truth of Italianness. That is the Evolian stance. And yes, in some ways it's more progressive in that it doesn't want to kill everybody. But
yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say about that other than just it's not. I don't know if it's whatever. It's not helpful,
right? Now we get into some really weird Platonic shit, which you were hinting at. Perhaps, but only if possible, not to project upon the androgynous the obviously split models of sexes as halves of the whole. Sex, according to Plato, is a unity, and that has to be divided. So the trajectory is to which, according to Varn, is between the subject and the object and is defined in relation to them. As Dasein, which according to Heidegger is in Sveitchen, on the border between the eternal and external, constituting itself as on an existential border between divisions of unity. As a concept of l'imaginaire consists of divisions within itself. In Greek, I don't know how to read that. And there's no transliteration, so as one of the possible regimes. So if we understand the androgyne in this way, not as something that is composite, but as something that is rooted or radical, we can talk about the radical notion, which is not sex in the sense that it is half of something else. That is, the gender of the fourth political theory is that half, that the sex is something simultaneously the whole and does not need its antithesis, therefore is self-sufficient within itself. We can theorize about gender because it does not so much come from the analysis of sexual or gender archetypes, but from thinking of philosophically upon the subject of fourth political theory. Thus, we change the formulation of the question. We do not ask which sex is Dasein. We answer that gender is the subject of the fourth political theory, the same as that of Dasein. In that case, we also talk of the radical, meaning root, from the Latin radicula, which is true. The androgyne, which it does not exist as a result of the combination of man and woman, but represents the primordial untouched unity. It's a metaphor for the unmoved mover in Platonic and Aristotelian thought. Just say it.
I just looked up this word. It's diaresis, which essentially, yes, it's like diversity and
that's just diversity.
And distinction. Yeah.
But diversity through distinction, yeah.
Yeah.
How does the gender change under the conditions of postmodernity? The postmodern represents a combination of all three political theories. On one hand, this is accomplished by modernity, which has reached its logical end as the hypermodern or ultramodern. Thus, all three political theories project into postmodernity their own gender archetypes, which represented the limits of their structures. These limits are expressed through the institutionalization of gender and postmodernity. Give me a fucking example of what you mean. Anyway,
Yeah, at least
what
one.
what postmodern gender is the maximization of liberal man, the archetype which applies to all of its antithesis: the stupid, the poor, the non-white, the little, and so forth. It also has the gender of globalization with its properties which extended as all social standards to all other types of universalism. Which I don't understand how you're a Christian and not a universalist. By the way, you say the creed every day, Dugin. You fucking heretic.
Yeah. I gotta say, I feel like this chapter should be a book, but also
I don't want to read it.
Yeah, the thing is, it really shouldn't be a book.
He also picks up on Donna Haraway, which is weird. In the West, the second political theory had great influence on elites, particularly the creative professions, actors, writers, philosophers. This is the Messiah machine incorporating leftist feminism into its ideas of freedom from sex. Donna Haraway is such a feminist, rather loosely a neo-Marxist and a postmodernist. She's a former Marxist and a postmodernist.
Everyone's a neo-Marxist.
Yeah, she's explicitly a
form. What's his name? The
Jordan
Canadian.
Peterson?
Jordan
Peterson. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone I don't like is a neo-Marxist, which is like leftist. With everyone I don't like is a Western Marxist.
Yeah.
Even though they've never read a shred of actual Chinese theory and they've just heard some speeches from political leaders. Anyway, she argued that while the mature women may feel an urge to be liberated, liberation in our culture involves the definition of the opposite. Therefore, it is necessary to overcome both man and women through becoming a cyborg. According to her view, sex can be only come overthrown by overcoming being human. In a similar vein as Foucault's conception of sexuality, the sexuality prior to sex as a neutral deposit of sexuality spreading amongst the surface of the screen, the body without organs. The body without organs is Deleuze. It's not Foucault. You dishonest piece of shit. I know you've read these people, and I know that given his citations of these people that this is actively dishonest.
Yeah.
Like attributing concepts to people you cite that are different from the people you're saying they belong to, and that you use their theories in rather adroit ways in other parts, indicates you know what you're doing.
Yeah, my defense of Dugin stopped before this chapter began, and at this point, I think if we were to return to the earlier things, I'd be like, there's something to that. But by this point, nah, I'm going to just
Dugin is
echo
best. Dugin is best when you are just talking about liberalism to court and not talking about why liberalism is.
Yeah.
Like if you're just describing the problems of liberal ideology in the modern world, well, Dugin lives in the same world as we do, so he's not totally wrong. Right.
And I do think that there's something to the idea that the condition of modernity throughout all of the changes in society, that the liberalism and variants of socialism and then variants of fascism are the three political theories. That much makes sense, and I think that's a workable schema. But then it's just, this book starts to become different kinds of thought at a certain point.
Yeah.
And I think that point was like 3 or 4 chapters ago.
This pansexuality, which is smooth surface of sexual arousals, remains unclear in the forms from whom it is derived. For that reason, and most importantly, no matter in what orientation or direction, as a whole, in the terms of erosion and destruction of gender constructions of modernity, Marxist thought introduces the most significant contribution. Elements of fascism and postmodernity are represented by the practice of BDSM. Okay, sure. Contemporary. I mean, there is a lot of fascist imagery in BDSM. Absolutely. I would also say, however, if you were to take a political poll of most perverts, they range on the political spectrum dramatically, and they tend to lead slightly left.
Yeah.
And I use perverts in the most non-judgmental sense possible. I would probably count, by my own definition, as a pervert. Contemporary fascism contains strong elements of sadomasochism, as perverted fascism is a century and attribute of postmodernism, along with feminism, cyborgs, a body without organs, and so on. So we eventually find ourselves in an interesting situation. The predominant gender of modernity is exposed as a re-extension of its original conception. It is fast eroding, and in some instances is about to explode, or perhaps has already exploded. Absolutely. If you just had this sentence, I might actually completely agree with him. The clavicular or the way the manosphere is turned into these looks maxing things where people are literally doing meth and breaking their jaw to increase their sexual desirability, but spending so much time doing that they don't even talk like people anymore. And I highly doubt they have that much attractiveness to the general fucking public of women.
Yeah, I would say that that's a really good example of decadence in society that goes well beyond an economic interpretation of the word.
Yeah. We stand on the transition between the hypermodern and the postmodern. We do not where the truth and reality lies. So the postmodern construction of gender will not be any men. Let us imagine the situation. The archetype of the man falls into pieces, which does not constitute a whole anymore, but symbolizes only themselves. Conservative forces can stand up for this archetype, demand the return to masculinity, this reasonable, wealthy white person, but thereby they only try to continue modernity through their gender reconstructions. This position seems hopeless. And here again, fourth political theory in our opinion goes forward. We suggest a step towards gender as Dasein, despite the notorious representations of an opprobrium that we will cause. But going beyond the limits of gender that we know, we share into the domain of uncertainty, androgyny, and sexist practice by the angels. So you have this.
That's you're not causing opprobrium by doing that, by saying that. It's
it seems the opposite, except that there's a primordial metaphysicalization of sex in here.
Yeah,
that he's also denying simultaneously. And I think I really do think this is confused because it's trying to get into the liberatory elements of like post-fascism on gender. Which, by the way, I mean, I'm going to say some stuff that's going to really make some leftists uncomfortable, but fascists often advocated for the vote simultaneously and in some cases before socialists, depending on the country. Vote for women, which is fucking wild given what else they did about gender. But that was mostly the Italian fascist and not the Germans. And
well, right. I mean, that's again, it's like the difference between these two phenomenon. It's actually really critical to understand. The Italian fascist futurism and the German National Socialist, what do you call it? I guess we'll call it romanticism.
Yeah.
Or whatever. They are very, very different.
All right. So chapter 15, where we have a recap again.
Yeah, what are we like? We're only like halfway through the book. Well, in this version of the text, this may be very different when what you're talking about.
We encountered a recap. We've had at least 3 recaps of the key points. But this is against the postmodern world, which is a defense of the conservative revolution, sort of, but not entirely. So unipolarity is evil, and the global West at its center in the United States at its core. And I'd be like, I don't know that metaphysical evil applies to geopolitics, but sure. The kind of unipolarity has global and geopolitical characteristics. Geopolitically, is strategic dominance of the Earth by North American hyperpower in the effort of Washington to organize the balance of forces on the planet. Although current geopolitics means that Dugin is more aligned with that now than he was when he wrote this book. Ideologically, unipolarity is based on modernist and postmodernist values that are openly anti-traditional ones. I shared a vision of René Guénon and Julius Evola, who consider modernity in its ideological basis, individualism, liberal democracy, capitalism, consumerism to be the cause of the future catastrophe of humanity, and the global domination of the Western lifestyle to be the reason for the final degradation of the Earth. And hell, if you just said that second part, I actually might even agree with you, but what's the Western lifestyle? Spiritually, globalization is a creation of a grand parody, the kingdom of the Antichrist. and the Antichrist is the United States. Propagated by the United States by forces of arms, Afghanistan, Iraq. This had to be added because it could not have been in the original Russian, Libya, and perhaps soon Syria and Iran. There's no way he's saying that in 2007, but it makes a lot of sense to say in 2012. What indication do you have of military forces in Libya in 2007?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, if you said soon Syria and Iran, sure.
Yeah,
but Libya, you're right. That's a giveaway.
Syria and Iran were kind of given.
Yeah.
Like there's been some forces trying to get to Iran since like 1981 or 1979, depending on who we're talking about.
Yeah.
But Syria has been the Baptists have been kind of a bug in everyone's eye for a long time. But Libya was, I mean, in 2007, Gaddafi had made good with the Western powers.
Yeah, it's like, because like by the time that this book was written, Libya had kind of changed in whatever. If it was
an orientation.
If the book was written in the mid 80s, then I would see why it would say Libya.
Right. And if it was written in 2011, I can see why it would say Libya.
Yeah.
But in 2007, when this book was original, I'm just saying this is evidence that the text we have in English is not the same, is not a complete clean translation of the original 2008 text in Russian.
Yeah.
I'm not saying the additions aren't Dugin's. They may very well be. I'm just saying that.
But they are
now. Yeah. I think if I read this text in Russian, it would be profoundly different. And the fact that we have two translations that have the book in completely different orders also indicates that to me.
Yeah, because I'm reading the last chapter of like a 15-chapter book right now.
Right.
And if I was trying to follow along like verbatim, you are reading whole sentences which aren't in this one.
Right. Although one of the translators is on both translations. So the For Political Theory group translation, which is the PDF you have, which was the informal translation that was done in-house for political sympathizers abroad before the Arcos Press version was released, is done by Mark Shabobda. The current one is done by Millerman and Mark Shabobda.
Yeah, and I have that version in hard copy, but that's back at home.
Right.
But it's it's different.
It's very different. And Shabobda's involved in both, although I don't know if it's because Millerman started with Shabobda's translation and checked the Russian and altered it accordingly, or if it's because with updates from Dugin, not stated but there, because clearly there have been updates.
Well, and Millerman's close enough to be able to talk to Dugin and say, hey, I want to do this and whatever. Like it's very reasonable to assume that happened.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I'm not saying there's anything nefarious about these clearly anachronistic editions. I just like to know when a translation has added stuff from the original as it was published.
I mean, that's nefarious enough in its own, in a different sense.
Right.
You should, this new edition needs a new preface which explains the additions. Whatever.
Yeah. So therefore, all traditionalists should be against the rest and globalization as well as against the imperialist policy of the United States. Now, this is where I actually think there's two places where the game is laid about what Dugin's doing with Marxism, where he explicitly says he's going to use it as a fifth column. Like that, we remember talking about that. And I'm like, he says it explicitly. People who say that he's copacetic with Marxism, he's telling you in the book, he's going to use you as a fifth column. If you ignore that, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, but the other thing, because he's not hiding it, the other thing is here, he calls himself a traditionalist. Now, for those of you who don't know, traditionalism is a code for Guénon and Evola and the right-wing critique of fascism that also a lot of those people were also at one time fascist. He valorizes the conservative revolutionaries here, but yeah, and we jump ahead. As for the theories of the third way, which were dear up to a certain point to certain traditionalists such as Julius Evola, there are certain acceptable elements, foremost among them being racism, xenophobia, and chauvinism. Which, I actually think, I don't know that I believe that that Dugin is not pro Ruski Mir chauvinism, considering other books I've read by him. See Putin versus Putin for an example of this.
I do believe him when he says that these are not only moral failures, but also theoretically and anthropologically inconsistent attitudes.
Yeah.
That does not mean, though, that he's not chauvinistic in ways that maybe he even doesn't even formally acknowledge. Right. But he will still state, though.
What I was going to say, though, biological racism and like ethnic xenophobia, I do think we have evidence that Dugin is against. I actually do.
Yeah.
That does not mean he's not a post-fascist, because that's my point. Is like he's a post-fascist. Like we should call it what it is. If we're gonna blame postmodernism on Marxism in any way, which I think you can blame some of it on Marxism.
Sure.
But it is a form of post-Marxism. It is an internal critique of Marxism that goes in a radically different direction that abandons its fundamental subject and principles. Right? Like it's populist or it's whatever. There's all kinds of things that post-Marxism can be, but it does not believe that the proletariat is the subject of history, or that even capitalism is the subject is the product of class struggle. And you see that, in Empire and the Multitude by Hart and Aguirre. You see that in a lot of contemporary post-Euro communist left populist parties in Europe. Nonetheless, when one society tries to judge another, it applies its own criteria and so commits to intellectual violence, which is funny because of course it does. Also, Dugin calls for real violence all the time, so I don't know what he has a problem with intellectual violence. Maybe it's the Agrigor thing again. This ethnocentric attitude is precisely the crime of globalization and Westernization, as well as American imperialism. And again, one of the things about Duginism is if you ignore every third thing he says and moderate every second thing he says, there are things that we can agree with in every one of these statements.
Or else, even if you don't agree with them, you can see them as interesting points to engage with. And there's a reason why this is it's a meaningful contribution intellectually to we are stuck intellectually, but I think we probably would stay there if this is this will only keep us there.
I want to read 2 more paragraphs about what he wants from people like us, Jason. If we free socialism from its materialist, atheistic, and modernistic features, so everything that makes it socialism. I mean, you could argue that atheism isn't necessary, but the 2 others are. And if we reject the racist and narrow nationalism of the third way doctrines, we arrive at a completely new political ideology. No, you don't. It's not new. What we call the 4th political theory, or 4PT. The first being liberalism, which is the essential challenge. The second being the classical form of communism. And again, though, but he accuses it's a classical form of communism and postmodernist thought. I don't get that. The third being National Socialism and fascism. Its elaboration starts at the point of intersection between the different anti-liberal political theories of the past, namely communism and third way theories. And we arrive at National Bolshevism, which represents socialism without materialism, atheism, progressivism, or modernism, as well as modified third way theories. And I hate to tell you, but if you tell me National Bolshevism doesn't have a fascist origin, you're a fucking liar. Like, the history of National Bolshevism.
Yeah, well, and he even says here
Ernst Neckish and whatnot. Like, come on.
And he even says here, like, it's one of the political theories that we're trying to salvage. He even says that.
Right. but this is only the first step. The mechanical addition of a deeply revised version of the anti-liberal ideologies of the past will not give us the final result. It is only the approximation of, and a preliminary result. We must go further and make an appeal to tradition and the pre-modern sources of inspiration. We had the Platonic ideal state, the medieval hierarchical society, the theological visions of normative social political systems, Christian, Islamic, Buddhist, Jewish, Hindu. These pre-modern sources, which are all universalistic except for Jewish and Hindu, so good luck with that. Pre-modern sources, I mean, seriously, Christian, Islamic, Buddhist, all universalist in claims. Like, they are.
Yeah.
Pre-modern sources that are in a very important for a national Bolshevism synthesis. Therefore, we need a new name for this type of ideology, and fourth political theory is quite appropriate. It is not to tell us what this theory is, but rather what it is not. So it is an invitation and an appeal rather than a dogma. Politically, we have an interesting basis for the conscious cooperation of radical left-wingers and the new right, as well as religious and other anti-modern movements such as the ecologists and the green theorists. For those remember blogs like Fight Against the System and people like Keith Preston, this was the whole, like, we can side with fascists to deal with the liberals thing. But maybe you anti-liberal socialists should be on our side and help us with the fascists. Like, that's never turned out well. Like, that's turned out well for us in the past, you know.
Yeah.
At the same time, we should strongly oppose any confrontation between religious beliefs, Muslims against Christians, Jews against Muslims, Muslims against Hindus, and so on. The interconfessional wars and tensions work for a cause of the kingdom of the Antichrist, who divide all traditional religions in order to oppose a pseudo religion, the eschatological. How can you tie non-Christian religions into an Antichrist on the good side of an Antichrist theology? I am very confused. Like, this is like this weird mixture of Orthodox theology and perennialism that is highly heretical. Like, and yet so many people seem to have so little religious education as to not be able to recognize that. Like, this is straight up heresy, even from an Orthodox Christian perspective.
Yeah.
Like,
I think he wouldn't even mind that. I think, but I feel like not addressing it it's well, whatever. It's not good. It's more than just lazy, though. It's seems kind of sneaky.
Yeah, they are against multipolarity, so they're against us. And the other thing that he does is he metaphysicalizes a geopolitical descriptor. So multipolarity is given a metaphysics. It's not just a descriptor of great power politics.
Yeah.
Which is what it is in E.H. Carr and Hans Morgenthau and the people who actually came up with the terms. And Fareed Zakaria even. So there we go. Those are the last two chapters in my version of the book. However, before we conclude, I should mention that there's some weird errata called the indexes, but I don't know if they're the indexes in Jason's version of the book. They may just be the last chapter in Jason's version of the book. I don't know.
No, they're the appendices.
The appendices one, post-political anthropology, which is just numbered assertions. Oh no, the appendices are just like long appendices, and then you have an actual essay, because the other appendices are just like no, they're like weird they're like weird almost manifesto points, I guess. They're numbered in my version. So there's Appendix 1, which is post-political anthropology, political post-humanity in the post-state. God, this part of it is definitely 2007, where you just put post in front of shit, and somehow that's communicative. The political soldierness Samaraklum, and the alternative and post-political post-anthropology, the pre-human and the PC. And all of this is about Carl Schmitt.
And so, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. Then you have the weird chaos magic part of this. Yes, there's chaos magic in this. The Metaphysics of Chaos, Appendix 2.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna mention. It's like you don't have that because
No, it's in this. It's the weird chaos magic part, which is like Deleuze plus Parmenides plus logos and anti-logos, which is also the justification of the fourth political theory using the fucking chaos star, created by Michael Moorcock. Not even the like for those of you who don't know, chaos magic was deliberately using tropes of 70s fiction to do magic, and they knew they were using tropes from fiction. They were open about it. So they borrowed from stuff like the Chaos Star, which made famous by Warcraft. I mean, I'm not Warcraft, excuse me, Warhammer. Warcraft is the original bad knockoff. Which was actually supposed to be a licensed product, and then it fell through, and so it got released without being a licensed product. But anyway, but Warhammer, which got it from Michael Moorcock, which is where the chaos magicians like Peter Carroll and Phil Hine get it from. And yes, Varn is enough of a nerd, of a religious studies nerd, to know who were the authors of the first Chaos Magician books were. Both we're British weirdos, I think.
And I'm not enough of a nerd to fact check or challenge you, so I'm just gonna have to say, yeah, you're probably right.
The same people that published early Dugin, Farrell House Press, and published a lot of like post-fascist stuff, also published chaos magic stuff. And that chaos star is used a lot in those circles. But that the chaos star, by the way, is a symbol invented by Michael Moorcock for his eternal warrior stuff, you know, which is also where D&D gets it from. Have a nice day. Your metaphysics come from fucking games. But anyway. And I guess maybe we should go over these, although not today. But the thing is, if you thought the Appendices is actually where he's clear about what he means. Also, he really likes Hart and Negri too. God, he likes all the worst European theorists. They were associated with the left in the early aughts and late and late 90s. Like,
yeah, and why is that? That's not clear. Is it just because they're not clear, so it's easier to like wiggle around and say that might mean this or that?
Yes, I think that's part of it. I also think it's also, if you were trying to appeal to the radical left before 2007 and 8 in the West, this is how you'd appeal to it.
Yeah,
Marxism was a remnant thing that appealed to some people, but like this seems to have been written without a lot of reference to like economic chaos in the West and all that. Which is also weird when there's like clear updates, but like it's not updated in its entirety. So there's like no talk of like Western economic failure for its own people or anything like that. If you're trying to get like more people onto this program, that's one of the things you might do. But then again, that would admit that economics matters, and he doesn't want to really admit that. So
yeah, because he barely touches. He doesn't really touch on that at all, actually.
Right. It's all like, ideas.
Over the course of an entire book, he doesn't really bring it up, except for to say that it's important to Marxism.
Right. And also that it was like this imago of liberalism in its initial stages. That's really the only thing where it comes up. Like we have mentions of being rich, but we don't have. We actually, interestingly, focus on rich and not on bourgeois a lot too. Like,
right, it's like rich, but like how and why?
Right. And then there's the other books published by Arcos Plus, some of which are explicitly post-fascist. I own some of these books in my studies of the dark arts. So people go like, really? Varn yes, I read a lot of this stuff.
Of course, it's important to read a lot of this stuff.
Beyond Human Rights by Alain de Benoit, which I've read. Beyond the Problem of Democracy by Alain de Benoit, which I even gave a good review 17 years ago. Believe it or not. The Manifesto for European Resistance by Alain de Benoit and Charles Champier, I think. Germany's Third Empire by Arthur Moeller von der Berg. The Arctic Home and the Vedas. That one's weird. Revolution from Above by Carrie Bolton, who was an explicitly a fascist. Fourth Political Theory by Aleksandr Dugin. You know this is early in the Arcos Press thing because later on they published like 8 more Dugin books. Archaeofuturism by Guillaume Fay. Convergence of Catastrophes by Guillaume Fay. Why We Fight by Guillaume Fay. The Wasp Question by Andrew Fraser. The Saga of the Aryan Races, volumes 1 and 2, volumes 3 through 5.
Yeah, that's really hard to explain away. That's just, that's not a good idea. That's a bad title. That's a bad subject.
Can Life Prevail by Pini Linkola, the Finnish eco-fascist, just explicitly eco-fascist. He's like with the people who like Atasha from the anarchist community who complained that fascism didn't kill enough people.
Yeah, that was a problem with fascism for sure.
A Handbook for Traditional Living by Radio. The Agni and the Ecstasy by Rosen. The Jedi and the Lotus, Star Wars and the Hindu Tradition by Rosen. It Cannot Be Stormed by Ernest von Solomon. Tradition and Revolution by Troy Southgate, the guy who started the Bay Area anarcho nationalist and was associated with the British National Front until he came to America, moved to the Pacific Northwest, and then started fascist groups in California. I have met this guy online. I actually met many of these people online in my weird transition period out of being a conservative. Against Democracy and Equality by Tomislav Sunik, and The Initiate, the Journal of Traditional Western Studies by David Wingard. And this is early on. I just read that just so you guys know what this is being associated with. And not as like even necessarily like just like that it would be an ad hominem to say that discredits any of these ideas. Like I said, I think some of these books are for lack of a better term, kind of smart, even if they're, problematic, to say the least. I would actually say that de Benoit is better than the Dugin by a lot. Like it's a lot more coherent.
I really should become a lot more familiar because I'm just not.
No. Well, because Marxists don't tend to engage with any of the political traditions of conservatism very seriously, and when we do, it tends to be like whatever the hot concept of the moment is, even though we say we're beyond that, but that's what we do. Like Yarvin's in the news right now, so people want us to read Yarvin and Land. If it would have been 2014, people would be asking us to read the Redix Journal by Richard Spencer. If it was 2008, people will be asking us to read everything by Bill and Irving Kristol before Bill Kristol became woke and part of the resistance. And I actually think we have to do some of that because those trends are actually popular on the right. But I also think we have to be careful with that because that's kind of on a treadmill of fads that are also not always particularly illuminating. And if we were talking about fads on the right, they've already changed because of the whole like MAGA, like even though MAGA Republicans are more unified behind Trump than ever, there's a lot less Republicans than there was even a year ago. People are just changing their political affiliation really quickly. And like there's a chance Utah might be a purplish state soon. It's nuts.
Really?
Yeah. Although it'll probably be managed like Texas, so who knows?
Yeah. It'll probably
Uh,
be barely significant, actually.
well, I mean, we are far redder than you are.
Well, yeah. I mean, that is the result of 15 years of constant replacement, like emigration from Southern California and New York to big cities in Texas, and immigration. Immigration from those places, then emigration from the rural counties out into like places like Kansas and stuff. So Texas has been kind of slowly swapping out the population from here and here, and then
But also,
basically
like
all the conservative people are moving away, and all the
the
liberal people moving in.
conservativeness of Texas is also somewhat of a modern phenomenon. By
Yeah,
modern, I mean contemporary. Like,
yeah,
it's
very very contemporary. Like I remember when Ann Richards was governor. Like I was young,
yeah.
but you know,
We in Georgia, we were ruled by Democrats until 2000. Like, they were conservative-ish Democrats, but they weren't opposed to the Clinton agenda. That was for sure. And the Dixiecrats left in the 70s, so it wasn't just Dixiecrats. Although there are enough people in Georgia who just changed parties the moment that the Republicans won the state house. That's all they did. Like, they didn't even change electeds. Like, but yeah, I mean, so I want people to, like, this way that most of us think of politics as fixed from like Bill Clinton forward is actually a very brief period of time. And thus, like, when people are like, oh, we're in realignment, we've been in realignment for most of the fucking 20th century, dips. Like, the last thing from fusing conservatism, which finally won actually with Bush and almost immediately started collapsing with Bush, because yes, it was initiated by Reagan, but it didn't win at the state level for another 20 years. Like,
I mean, the thing about a two-party system means that we are in a constant state of realignment all the time, because we don't have enough space. The fact that you can have Lindsey Graham and James Fishback, those are both in the Republican Party, and then you have Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton in the same Democratic Party. It's like,
or even in your state's Democratic Party, like Crockett and Telluride, which was a weird thing where they were like, well, Telluride's not as left. And I'm like, he's more left in economic issues, and he's slightly left on social issues because he's a Christian.
I mean, like, in a very weird, not exact one-to-one, but in a way.
Is it Telluride? Let me see what his name is. I think
Tallarico, actually.
Tallarico. Thank you. I anglicized it. God, bad me.
In a way, in a sense, the U.S. two-party system presents a version of the argument that Dugin makes at the beginning and toward the end of this book about the conscious cooperation between ostensibly, antithetical contra, like, ideologies or whatever that are contra
so
each
let
other.
me tell you a few things that I suspect is going to happen and people are going to not be happy about when we talk about Democrats in the future. I am very hesitant to predict the future, but there's one thing I'm going to say. I don't see the Trump tariffs in particular being completely reversed because the Democrats are afraid of losses of revenue stream. And they will be normalized by the time the Democrats take power. They will probably be much more limited in the scope under the Democrats, and they won't be as arbitrary. But like our normal thing that the Democrats take Republican policies and manage them slightly more rationally and only slightly more, is probably going to be the continued thing. ICE is a different scenario. I have no idea what's going to happen there, but I'd be very surprised, even though ICE abolition is called for by everyone, if it's actually abolished. And if it is abolished, all they're going to do is move it back into the ATF.
I mean, it depends. Not called for by everyone. I might have this exact person wrong, but it's also right anyways. Which is like Hakeem Jeffries is not a nice abolitionist.
No. And even the ICE abolitionists do not mean what people think they mean. They didn't either during the first time they were calling for it to be abolished. I might add, they were mostly talking about moving it back into the ATF.
Yeah.
The Department of Home if the Democrats wanted to get rid of the Department of Homeland Security, they would have done it under Obama, and they didn't. Even though it's been a hotbed of like almost a personal army of their enemies. So, you know, we'll see what they do. I do think things are becoming more and more unstable. Like, I think both parties are going to see weird insurgents from all sorts of different ideologies become more and more dominant. And that's going to create space for things like the DSA, but it's also going to create space for things like Tellurico and people weirder than that. And if California is any indication, the California Democrats are moving right of Newsom right now.
Yeah, I think that Newsom will be seen as the compromiser.
Right. Like stuff I've heard out of the California Democratic gubernatorial primary is a little bit like, whoa. So we'll see how all this goes. I also have no idea how Mamdani is going to go, but I think he's going to hit some funding walls that they're already hitting. Will he be able to transverse them? Maybe he'll be better than every other progressive or left populist. I think he's doing a better job than Brandon Johnson and certain other key figures, but also we're only.
It's also not an extremely high bar to do better than Johnson.
No, but Johnson also hit the wall because of not understanding how the funding of a city works. Yeah. And that's already beginning to happen. Mamdani understands it, but he's already beginning to hit hard walls because he doesn't have a majority of the city council, and he doesn't have a majority of the state legislature, and Hoke Hill is only willing to play with him so much. She'll give him some things and not others. And even his policy victories are at Hoke Hill's granting. So it's going to be interesting. This is not to say that it's doomed. I just find all this stuff really, we talk about this right now. One of the things I get from Dugin, and I guess maybe we'll come back to this on our final episode on Dugin. So this is the penultimate episode, guys. But we have one more left, and we'll get it out in a month. Damn it! From when I post this,
we'll get it out in a
month. And then we'll take some time off to read another damn book, I'm going to remind people the tradition of the order in which we're reading. Russell Kirk, the conservative tradition, because I'm sorry, you guys need to know it. It's not fun. It's your like vegetables. Eat it. If you want to understand conservative fusionism from Goldwater to like 5 years ago, you have to understand that book. Then we'll read Leo Strauss, which is super important for neoconservatives, which I now think is also, I think we're going to see a lot more of the liberal end of neoconservative ideas in the Democratic Party, particularly since they're now hedging their Atlanticism. They now want to save the Atlantic system, not the United States, which is interesting.
Well, yeah, because the United States, that's nationalism. You can't say that.
Right.
That's bad.
Right. Well, nationalism is only good if it serves globalization for them.
Right.
Which is actually somewhat honest to the capitalist prerogatives, honestly. I think a lot of the national capitalists are just lying to themselves about what they actually want. But whatever.
Yeah, I actually think that well, that's a whole different discussion. But yeah, I agree. I think that we are in this country, we are just way too easily duped and or easily confused, earnest but accidentally confused. I think that our nationalists are globalists, our internationalists are globalists, our conservatives are liberal. Everyone's liberal. Everyone's
our Marxists are mostly liberal.
Yeah,
our post-liberals are just older liberals.
Yeah.
Like Because like what do they post? They don't really want to go back to like. They don't even really want to go back to like the Reformation. They want all the aesthetics of the pre-modern world, but like no actual pre-modernness. like
Yeah, I mean,
they're not
like,
giving up their fucking penicillin. I'll tell you that.
well, and they're also not going to give up anything else. Their regiment of clock time, their imposition of conception of the passage of time that we have inherited from modernity. That every single thing, not just in terms of technology, but also in terms of the way we think about things. Everything is is transhistoricized. Everything's flattened.
Right.
So whether you are a conservative or a liberal, you are in fact in favor of liberal modernity, which I think is one of the actually genuine and actually interesting things about Dugin is when he talks about being a traditionalist, in as much as that's an actual point of discussion, that's a place where I think it's worth actually having.
The thing is, though, if your traditionalism involves whatever the hell is going on in that gender chapter, I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, well, right.
Like, and also the traditional world is not pluralist except in very, 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 not just in pre-modern. I mean, you got to get pre-Christendom.
Yeah,
for pluralist conceptions of
all I mean there is that like Dugin's raised some questions which he does a really bad job of answering, but I think those are actually worth taking up anyways.
All right, so we'll go through the conservative tradition. I won't make people wade through it over 2 years, I promise. Then we'll read Leo Strauss's Natural Right and History. Then we'll read Alain de Benoit, The Problem of Democracy. And like I said, I think Benoit is the smarter version of this kind of thinking than Dugin. But also in being smarter and more direct, I think also confuses fewer people and is thus less popular.
Yeah.
Then we'll read, oh God, because I have read this before, and parts of it are smart, but most of it hurts me, and his writing style makes me want to choke someone. And the way he talks online just makes it clear that he's a fucking poser. Mencius Mulbug / Curtis Yarvin's A Letter to a Young Progressive. This is one thing I slightly hold against Mark Fisher. Mark Fisher going hard against Land is one of the first people who put Mencius Mulbug as a figure into print in ways that were outside of very fringe elements of the right.
Yeah,
it was Fisher's engagement with him. And
yeah, I would say that's definitely a reasonable grievance to have against Fisher, forever.
Yeah, I mean, I'll defend Mark on a lot of things, but like helping popularize neo-reaction by opposing it sloppily is probably a problem.
And that's unforgivable.
And then we'll read A Rome McIntyre's A Total State. A Rome McIntyre is interesting. He's not related to Lester McIntyre, by the way. I don't even think their name is spelled the same way, actually. But in that he is a formal normie Republican who became woke and tries to synthesize all these like neo-reactionary and radical traditionalist figures and Italian elitism into something Republicans can find palatable.
That's a hell of a task.
Right. Which that was his Total State book is about. And then so we'll read that. And I'll pick something from normie conservatives before we get to Nick Land's Dark Enlightenment. Because there's other stuff. There's a bunch of stuff I didn't put on there, but I'm going to put on there. And by the time we get through with that, I predict that'll take us 3 years if we actually do it every month.
I mean, who knows? Maybe interesting enough things will happen in the world that will fundamentally shift how we approach this stuff too.
Yeah, who knows?
I mean, a year ago that would be less likely than I think it is now.
Well, I mean, here's the thing with Dugin. Dugin has gone out of relevance and back into relevance, and kind of out of relevance and then back into relevance during
Yeah,
the
a
cycle
couple of times.
of us talking about this book. Because we've done 12 episodes over a year and a half. So, although admittedly with like a 10-month break. So like, sorry guys.
Yeah.
So there we go. But yeah, also some of these books are way longer than this book, so we won't be able to go as closely if we ever want to finish them.
Yeah, we might have to do a lot more summaries, synopses,
Yeah.
synopsis. We don't.
Yeah, if I do like a line by line of Leo Strauss's Natural Right and History, we will be here for a million years. Unless we do this like twice a week. So yeah, I don't think we want to. We don't devote that time to Marx. Jason, you have projects. Tell our audience about your projects. Let's actually do the shill thing because I have stuff to shill too.
Yeah. So I think the main thing is a great podcast. I say great, but like I'm on it. But it's called Unbreakable Union, and it is a decade by decade deep study of the Soviet history, and that starts with the founding of the Soviet Union. So it's not a Russian Revolution podcast; it's a Soviet Union podcast.
So it starts in 1922, not in 1917.
Yeah, it starts with like discussing the Constitution, whatever. So then the second season is the 1930s, the third season, and it still goes like that. And so it's like and it's so
you got 8 seasons because that's how long the Soviet Union lasts.
Yeah, more or less. I think it's 8 seasons.
Unless you're, I mean, are you going to devote a full series to the 1 year in the 90s in which the Soviet Union existed?
No, that last season is
80 to 92.
It's the end of Brezhnev all the way to the end of the Soviet Union.
Okay.
So it's but like one season is just the Second World War. And but not just like, it's not it won't be like the war, it'll be like developments in Soviet life and Soviet politics because of and in tandem with the war. So it's this podcast is me and a like longtime friend and it's people who are listeners to the Regrettable Century will be familiar with Matthew, who lives in Paris, and he's the other half. But yeah, that's the thing I would plug.
Yeah, this seems like the more limited attempt to what the Measures Taken tried to do for the entire history of socialism, starting with the Second International.
Yeah, I think that the Measures Taken maybe a bit off. Well, more than I could chew, anyways. But like, okay, so season 1 is 1917 to 1927. Season 2 is 1928 to 1940. Season 3 is 1941 to 53. Season 4 is 53 to 64. 5 is 65 to 82, and 6 is 82 to 91. So it's actually not 8 seasons. It's not literally a decade per season.
So there's like a couple. There's like 2 Stalin seasons.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it sounds like you're vaguely cutting them off under basically who was the general secretary of the party at a given time.
All the way up to the last season, because then it's like okay, so season 6 is called The End. Episode 1 is Afghanistan. Episode 2 is Andropov, Chernenko, and Gorbachev. Episode 3 is Perestroika and Glasnost. So like, it's we
Andropov is my favorite weird hardcore old guy from the Soviet Union, old ML. So I'm excited. We're gonna do a whole show on the main podcast, not on this, obviously, because it's not about conservatism. About your project, but I wanted people to know that it's coming. And you also still are on the Regrettable Century with your brother and your 2 other comrades in arms, your spiritual brothers.
Yeah, with Ben and Kevin. And
yeah, I always forget about Ben because he's relatively new.
Yeah.
But
I've known Ben. Ben's been a political collaborator and a very good friend for many years.
All right.
He's good.
And so you guys should check that out. I do this podcast. If you're watching it on this channel, and if you're watching it, you're watching on this channel because you guys don't do YouTube. I do Varn Blog. There's a new series with me and Daniel Tutt on the various conceptions of materialism and socialism. It'll probably start to be released probably this time more on the Emancipations channel than on mine because we tend to share the responsibility. And last time, 3 out of 4 of them came out on my channel. His channel Emancipations. It'll probably start being released in July. I have a book coming out from Revo Press that'll be releasing in June. It is a short book. It's about, I think it'll probably end up being about 80 pages once it's printed. It was originally a pamphlet, but it's gotten longer, so now it's just a short book. Called The People Are Not One. I will be doing appearances in the Northeastern Corridor and also maybe on the West Coast if people fly me out, but for sure in the Northeastern Corridor, in New York, DC, and probably Baltimore, and maybe also in New Jersey. And for those of you who want to follow the channel, I'll announce this, but guess what? They're free. These are not pay to play events. I'd appreciate it if you bought a book, because that pays for me to go out there, but you don't have to. And at least I'm not gonna say every one of the events we're doing is free, but most of them we're doing are free. So keep following my Patreon or this channel to find out when those are happening. We're still booking a few venues now. Also,
I think that not only should you buy the book, you should read the book.
Yeah, actually read it. It's 80 pages. Get your ass together and read a book.
Yeah.
It's also, the book is problematic in the sense that I realized stuff we left out of it, and we're already working on another book to cover the stuff we didn't put in the book.
That's kind of like Dugin levels of publishing, like every thought that's a book.
Yeah.
Or Chomsky.
Well, when book publishers want books that are between 80 and 150 pages so that they can keep them affordable, guess what? A book, what would have been one like 500-page book is now 5 100-page books. So enjoy modular bookdom. But anyway, so that is being that. But for those of you like Varn, you've said you're going to write books before. This one's done. It's done. It's written. Stick a fork in it. Go away.
I actually want to be one of those people and say, when are you going to release? When are you going to finish your
Christopher Lasch book?
Yeah.
Part of the Christopher Lasch book ended up as 2 paragraphs in this book, but Daniel and Shallon and I are discussing doing a set of essays on Lasch where I use my research to write explanatory intros and conclusions with Shallon and Daniel, and then we all write essays and take some essays explaining the uses and problems of applying Christopher Lasch to the modern left. That is in the works, because I have 600 pages of notes on Christopher Lasch. I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah, no, I don't think you're exaggerating at all.
Like, I've literally now read every single thing I can find by the man, including stuff that's not even available in easy archives. My last goal is to get to Rochester before I actually publish anything, get to the University of Rochester and spend time in the archives that I can get into, because some of the archives are still private and you can't see them. and look at a few things, because I have some questions about what boxes in the archives were not open for his biography, which was written by a Christian, like a Christian moderate conservative. And I want to know what's in those boxes. And I think some of them are publicly available and some of them are just indexed. But anyway, for those of you who want to know the level of research that I've done, I literally know the inbox, the fucking letter boxes to his damn archives. That's where I'm at. I just need to get to them to figure out if I have access to the letters in those boxes in those archives and can write them down in nice handwritten, old-fashioned note. So that might still happen. I'm hoping it'll happen. I don't know who's going to publish it. But I'm also basically, we finished the book on populism. We're going to talk about left controversies of populism and social reproduction. That's probably going to end up being a book too. And then I have another project that I am co-writing. You guys will notice that I co-write a lot because I'm aphasic and my writing takes forever if I do it by myself. With another author on theories of politics and Marxist responses to them. But I think we're trying to narrow that down because my inclination was to try to cover the entire Western political tradition and some parts of Chinese political tradition. And then I was like, oh yeah, that would be 1,000,000 pages. What am I doing?
Yeah, that would be that would be way too big. That's
like one of those books. It's one of those books that you think you're going to write when you're 20. Like when with someone whose memory is damnatio memoriae, so I won't say their name. Asked me to write a book on the history of the left and actually wanted me to start with Zoroastrianism.
Okay.
Because we wanted to start even before Kolakowski did with Plotinus.
Yeah.
And I started to outline it and I gave up immediately. Like, I was like, no. Like, well, I don't know enough languages to do this. Like,
not yet.
Somehow I don't think I can read ancient Avestan and learn it fast enough to write a book on the topic. And then also learn I don't know what, like Attic Greek and probably other forms of Greek. And like, yeah, that's not happening. Yeah. But anyway, long story short, there's that. And lastly, and this is the last show I'm going to do, is this will be released in time for you to sign up. I am teaching a maximum 100 person in 2 sections, so 50 persons each, class on unresolved controversies in Marxism, and importantly, this last part's important, their practical implications. For example, one of the controversies I definitely think we're going to cover is why we've never come up with a coherent or good answer to the national question and why that's mattered so damn much. And people might go, Lenin came up with a good answer to the national question. And I'm going to go, yeah, but even Stalin didn't follow it forever. So, like,
yeah. And also, I think that a lot of times when people say that Lenin had the answer, like, I don't think that people actually know what that is. Like, yeah. I don't think that like Lenin's position is nearly as universally applicable as people think it is, or B, is as known as people pretend it is.
No, it's not just national liberation.
Yeah.
It's more than that. So
anyways,
yeah, that's one controversy we're going to be doing. We're going to be doing at least 6 controversies over 6 sessions, and they will have readings and contextualizations. For patrons, this is $20. For high-level patrons, it's $10, and for non-patrons, it's $50. I will give you all the materials that you need. Most of them are public access, and all the materials will be also released for free to the public after the class, except for the videos, which will be released to patrons 6 months later. So that is on offer. Man, I feel like a shill right now. I'm sorry, but you know, we live in this economy. We got to do it. Yeah. Also, one last thing, and this is free. I have made reading lists and study guides for controversies and histories of things on the left that are book based. So you can read the books, read the histories for contextualization, and do discussion questions and sessions with your friends. Because sometimes you have to do reading groups and aren't just Capital Volume 1 for the 85,000th time. And so if you go to my Patreon for free, this is available for free. You don't have to subscribe. You don't even have to be a free member. For free, you can access these. They're free. All right. I would appreciate if you did. So they are available for you because I got tired of university syllabuses and sectarians being the only people who did reading group and reading list and pedagogical instruction list. And these are very rudimentary. They are meant to be done by yourself with a journal or in a small group. They are not extensive. But if you do them, you will learn a lot about left-wing history. I promise.
And I also promise that you need to.
Yeah. So those of you who keep going, Varn, you keep on telling us to read stuff, but you don't ever tell us a coherent program and how to do it in what order. And yeah, I'm doing that now. So shut up. You That's complained enough that I listened. And not only did I give it to you, I gave it to everyone. I bequeath this onto you. Come on. That's a long, we've now been plugging for 20 minutes and I apologize. But yeah, so those are the plugs. And we have one. I swear to you, only one episode of Dugin. Hopefully it will be out by June. It'll be recorded by June, damn it. Yeah. And then we'll start Wurzel Kirk and then Leo Strauss and Alain de Benoit and Aron McIntyre and Nick Land. And oh my God, why did you guys make me read? You guys hate me. You're making me read Curtis Yarvin. You just hate me. I've read Curtis Yarvin and it's like it pains me.
If
and I read Guinée Guinan.
If not for this poll, then I would say, there is a volume 2 to the fourth political theory called The Rise of the Fourth Political Theory. And I think I'm going to read that.
Yeah, we can come back to it because I don't want this to become all Dugin all the time. But yeah.
Yeah, because I think that would be giving him way too much weight.
Credit. Yeah, it also would be making us more or less formally boosters at that point.
Yeah,
but anyway, I have covered for those of you who missed. There are some episodes when Jason couldn't meet where Donald Parkinson and I talked about Putin versus Putin, and I would also, what I didn't put on here is some of the really classical stuff from this tradition. Like I didn't put any like Avola. Like the critique of fascism for the right, the critique of Nazism from the right, or any of that. And that exists. And I didn't put like any of the neo-Confederate literature on here. And I didn't put, I have yet to be made to read an actual Nazi. Other than Carl Smith. I take that back. Never mind. Yes, I have. And Werner Sombart and Heidegger. So never mind. But I didn't put any of that on there either. So maybe we have to talk about that. I do think not putting Carl Smith's The Concept of the Political on there and political theology was probably not wise in retrospect. Because I don't know, maybe we'll have to do that eventually.
There will be more years.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
hopefully
there might be more years.
There will probably be more years.
That's right.
And on that note, protect your peace, like and subscribe to all of our podcasts. Damn it, go listen to Regrettable Century if you don't.
I would. I think it's pretty
And
good.
if you listen to Regrettable Century, come over and listen to me. I think most of you do, actually. I've looked at the overlap in the Discord channels. But if you don't, you're welcome over here. I'm not. I do bite, but probably not you. And we'll end it there. Thank you, Jason, for giving me your time. We've been going for 2 hours. We won't do any of these epic 4-hour things. So we're in there. You'll be back on soon to do, just so you guys know, Jason will be coming back on with his brother to talk about decadence. And now we're going to talk about like Ross Donut Hat or whatever his name is.
That's what it is.
Do it like and
we're doing that this Sunday.
Yeah, we are. Well, that's when we're recording it. It's not going to be when it comes out, Jason, but yes. And it'll come out like a month after this will, because this is on a different rotation scheme than that. But and also we are doing probably sometime in the next couple months, well, probably in the next week or two, an in-depth deep dive to your new podcast about what its aim is, why you're doing it, and why it matters. And I'd like to thank you for that. Do you have anything you're particularly excited about coming up on Regrettable Century? Like,
we have a couple things. One thing we're gonna do next month is we're gonna talk with I don't even know if I should say his name right now. Whatever. We're gonna be going through a kind of a dichotomy between abolition democracy versus Reconstruction democracy. It's two different conceptions of the Republican tradition and basically the left, the kind of classical Communist Party version of the trajectory of American Republican history versus the more liberal and the left liberal version. And I'm really interested in that. Another thing is we're also going to be talking at some point about your book.
Oh yeah. I'll be sending you galleys or proofs soon. So,
yeah, I can't wait to read that. And then the other thing is I'm just now starting to work to put this together, but I'm really interested in doing a deep dive, or at least a preliminary dive into the rise of conspiracy thinking, basically in place of class-based movement,
which is ubiquitous right now.
Yeah, conspiracy thinking on the left in particular. And that's coming up.
Yeah, I find it interesting. We could, like, the other big heyday of left-wing conspiracy theories are like the 70s and early 80s, and I just want to think about what that says about where the left is at.
Like, well, yeah, and it makes sense that it would be like right after the crest of the last explosion of mass mobilization.
Right. No, I don't think that's it. I mean, it's not a perfect parallel, but I don't think that's insignificant. Like, I don't, like, you know. Yeah. Well, thank you, Jason, for coming on, and we'll end it there. Everyone, thank you for your patience and dealing with 20 minutes of rambling at the beginning and 30 minutes of rambling at the end. You got an hour and a half of on topic, so there you go.
That's not so bad.
Yeah. Well, actually, that math doesn't actually add up. So you got an hour and 15 minutes of on topic, but whatever. You got more on topic than not. All right. Yeah. On that note, we're in. See you later.
Yep. Bye.